how long it had been since we had a meeting, and it was about 8 years, yes, or thereabouts. But I just want to talk then a little bit about, what it is that interested me in Chris's work at the start. And I think one of the really exciting things about, being able to follow an artist's work over a period of a number of years is to see what it is that they bring along with them all during that time, and also how the work changes. So, what motifs are familiar from the work from the 1990s and the early part of the millennium. What are the new things that he's bringing to it, and how has it subtly changed? How are the ideas being explored and deepened and developed, and what is he doing that is unexpected and different? I think one of the things that I noticed from this show that I had become aware of, right at the start that drew me to his work, was this interconnection between architecture and the landscape. I think maybe architecture is maybe the wrong word in a sense, because what we're talking really about is habitations, spaces, architectural spaces that people actually use. It's not just the buildings as if they were separate from the people, it's these are places that people belong to. But the earliest works that I recall of Chris's were interior spaces where there were dark spaces, abandoned, quiet places, such as, say, the inside of an attic or of a church. Very silent kind of spaces. And in those works, you got a sense of windows. There were windows, and you got shafts of light coming in through those windows. And I can recall these, they're really haunting. I can see them still, all this time later. And I can almost imagine I could see the dust motes in the shafts of light coming in through the windows. So I'm not sure they were actually there, but certainly that's the sense you got. That was the subtlety of them. And these were windows with the light coming in, and yet I get a sense that they were not windows really that you would look out of, that they were maybe a bit grimy. These were old kinds of spaces, and so you were in a very kind of enclosed interior, contemplative kind of space. That's how I recall them. Now, one of the interesting things about them, one of the many interesting things about them, was that these were painted on maps, and that was the first reason why I was particularly interested, because I was looking at cartography as a strategy of contemporary artists. So, great maps, let's know more about this. And then I just got completely hooked. But what I thought was so interesting about having them painted on the maps was that you could see the map in the areas where the light hit the space, and then you had these dark shadows that sort of defined the architectural space that you're in. So very, 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 very skillfully and subtly and understated done. But the maps kind of gave you a sense of the exterior world, the wider world beyond this very enclosed, hermetic, well, hermetic's the wrong word, but these enclosed spaces that you're in. And then the next phase that I can recall of his work is where he continued to work on the maps, but he moved outdoors in work that I see kind of a recollection of that work in the current pieces here. So these were again painted on maps, but they were exterior spaces where you had these human habitations in the wider landscape. But what was especially remarkable about those habitations was they didn't have any windows. They were kind of hermetically seen. They were very self-contained. So in a sense, they looked vulnerable and fragile, but in another sense, they looked as if they were powerful and enclosed and complete and whole. So it was quite an interesting, kind of subtle combination of things that were going on there. So you've got this kind of inscrutability about them, because when you have windows in a building, it reads almost like eyes. So you get a sense that you can peer into the space and see and observe, and also you get a sense of somebody inside that can look out. So you've got this reciprocity between the interior and the external in the exterior space. And this kind of challenges that expectation in quite an extraordinary way. So you find yourself being drawn into it and intrigued by it. And in these buildings, again, we found them perched on the landscape, but you had a sense of the depth of the landscape beneath the building. So it's as if they were sitting on the skin of the earth, but you could see all of the layers, all of the strata and the fissures of the earth going down beneath it. So you had a sense of, the kind of ancient provenance of the life of these houses. The houses suggest, the passing life, the shortness of life in a sense, but the landscape on which they sat had been there forever, for millennia, and this was the provenance of those buildings. So you had these kind of interesting opposites going on. But these were painted on maps again, and this is where I see a departure in the current work, is that we don't see the literal maps any longer. and there's no necessity any longer to have them. You know, that they take, in a sense, that idea, that mapping impulse comes with them, because look at the kind of view that we have over this panorama. You know, the kind of spaces, you know, the high viewpoints over the landscape give a real kind of sense of a mapping impulse without having to literally describe and to show the maps. I mean, what was interesting with the maps, or with even the kind of hint, the suggestion, the residue of the map, if you like, that we see now, is how in the maps we see, you know, you see all of the interconnecting roads, the pathways, these liminal spaces that take you from one place to another. And yet also on the maps what we see are boundaries and divisions, enclosed spaces that separate people out. You know, the kind of borders and boundaries that define private space. So you've got this kind of contrast between linking places and dividing spaces being inferred, you know, in the map. And maps are very powerful things. They are landscapes in a sense, but they're symbolic landscapes. And they, when we think of maps, you know, that there are essentially the two kinds, the ones that describe the physical landscape, the mountains, the seas and so on. And then we have the ones that are full of man-made objects, the man-made elements, the roads and the towns and so on. And it's no accident that those kind of maps are called political maps, because they have this other dimension to do with control and power, and to do with title and entitlement that goes with it. And I think it's also interesting always to remember that the body that is responsible for making maps is the Ordnance Survey. And people forget that ordnance is about military strategies and about weaponry and about symbols of power and control. Again, even though now we've that's been sort of forgotten about when we look at a map. And we think about as well when we look at maps, how so much that is selective is involved in making a map. That it's down to selections that are made by the map makers for the map users. We think of traditional maps where Europe is placed right in the centre, but absolutely Eurocentric. And most maps we might look at are Eurocentric as well. But of course, you know, why would Africa not be in the centre, or Australia, or you know, anywhere high basalt be right in the centre? So you've got this kind of this selective element in maps that is used for political reasons and often power reasons, but reasons of discovery and travel and transport and all kinds of other things as well. So even though this work departs from literal representation and usage of maps, not paint on maps, there is still something of that residue and that concept left behind, or brought along in the work. What I think is very interesting about this work as well is the use of colour. Because as I recall, the earlier works, again beyond maps was the element of colour. I recall also that there were a lot of leaves as well in those. Sometimes I think the leaves were actually cut out of maps or they were painted. But the autumnal colours associated with that, you know, I recall from them. And of course we think, when we think of autumn and leaves and so on, of course this time of year, we think in terms of the passage of time and a sense of loss, of something, the end of things, or approaching the end of things. So this element of time, I think, is vitally important in his work. And especially then when we look at the kind of the layers of the landscape, you know, this sense of the folds and the strata and the element of time. We've got this combination between cyclical time, which is very ancient, and then the shorter cycles of time as well. So those elements all being introduced into this work. And this work, of course, is departing from those autumnal colours. It's working through shades of, initially when I was thinking about this, I think from black and white, it's not actually black and white, it's actually subtle shades of grey, from the palest, softest, down to very deep into the blacks. You've got this wonderful monochromatic tonal range in the work, which is wonderfully subtle. And really, you know, it's very attractive, you know, it's very seductive. So we find a lot of time just looking and exploring them and following the folds and fissures in the landscape that's represented there. And one of the things as well about those folds is you're following the folds and fissures in the landscape, and that this work, which turns out to be called fold, I think is really appropriate, because on the one hand you're looking at paintings that suggest the depth and the weight and the power of stone, tons and tons and tons of stone weight. And then as you follow through, you realise it's not the fold of stone that you're looking at, but the folds of paper in a work such as this. So you're going from something which is powerful to something which is fragile. And, you know, it's these kind of contrasts in the work of time, you know, the length and the durability of time, or something which is brief and passing, or, you know, looking at the power and the strength of the environment, and yet its fragility as well. And I think these kind of contradictions and contrasts are what help us to kind of really understand our landscape and understand humanity's place within the landscape. I was interested as well the way in some cases you've got the little houses placed on top of a kind of a landscape that looms beneath it, which is an extraordinary idea, and then others are placed low and the stone kind of looms above it. I think these sculptures are absolutely extraordinary, but a real sense of this granite, this looming above these little tiny cottages, and I would think they're placed on a very still lake, and I see it on the clouds, that element there. So there's just so much going on. I mean, I could spend all night reading these works to you, but I think really centrally speaks for themselves, you know, and I think rather than me rabbiting on endlessly about them in my enthusiasm, I think they're absolutely gorgeous. I think I'll leave you the opportunity to read them for yourself, and there's just so much more to read into them and to discover them. So thank you so much. Huge privilege, huge privilege.